Welcome, parents. In this explainer, we're going to take a really honest but warm look at a very real issue happening in our schools right now. Today, we are exploring why so many incredibly capable students, especially those from historically underrepresented backgrounds, are completely missed by gifted math programs. And more importantly, we'll talk about how you can help. As a teacher, I've seen firsthand how brilliant minds can just slip through the cracks of a really well-meaning system. We're going to rely directly on the latest research to unpack this, so let's get right into it. So let's dive in. When you hear the word gifted, what immediately pops into your head? As an educator, I can tell you that parents, and honestly even some teachers, often believe a gifted math student is this incredibly fast calculator who always hands in perfectly neat homework, sits quietly, and follows all the rules. But the research, it shows that's actually a huge myth. The stereotype we just talked about relies heavily on speed, neatness, compliance, and just plain old rote memorization. But the reality of true mathematical potential looks entirely different. It often looks like a messy tolerance for productive struggle. It's complex reasoning, thinking way outside the box, and actually needing time to deeply grapple with a concept rather than just robotically speeding through a worksheet. Sometimes that kid staring out the window isn't actually distracted. They're turning a highly complex geometry problem over in their head. Section 1. How systems miss students. So if true giftedness looks so fundamentally different from the stereotype we've been handed, we need to explore exactly how our current school systems unintentionally miss these bright kids. Researchers in advanced education actually refer to this as the problem of missingness. Now, I want to clarify, this doesn't mean every single overlooked student is necessarily gifted, but it does mean there is a massive systemic gap where highly capable students are heavily underrepresented in advanced K-12 coursework. And this disproportionately impacts Black students, Latino students, low-income students, multilingual learners, and twice exceptional students, which is a really important term we'll define a bit later. When capable students are missed early on, it can literally alter their entire educational trajectory and future opportunities. Now, I want to be absolutely clear on one thing. This is not about blaming individual hardworking teachers. Teachers are doing their absolute best in an incredibly demanding environment. Rather, the system itself has structural blind spots. One of the biggest barriers, relying on a referral bottleneck. When schools require a teacher or a parent to officially nominate a child for gifted testing, it creates this subtle but massive barrier that heavily favors well-informed families. And that brings us to a really vital concept called cultural capital. Think of this as the extent to which a person is familiar with the features of the dominant culture. Things like language, mannerisms, and specifically educational standards. It's like having insider knowledge. Gifted referral systems naturally favor families with high cultural capital. If you already know how to navigate the school system, exactly who to email, and what forms to fill out, your child has a massive advantage in getting evaluated. But families who just don't have that specific insider knowledge are left in the dark, even if their child is brilliant. Because of these bottlenecks, the real-world cost is honestly staggering. Studies estimate that up to 74% of Black students who have the capability and should be identified for gifted programs are completely overlooked. Just let that sink in for a second. Nearly 3/4 of these capable minds are simply missing from the rosters just because the system's structure filters them out before they even get to take a test. Section 2. The testing trap. Okay, so let's say a student does manage to get past that referral bottleneck. Even then, they often fall into what researchers call the testing trap. Let's look at how we measure talents once a student is actually referred. Traditional tests use what we call national norms. Basically, this compares a child to students nationwide, which inherently includes kids in the most highly resourced, privileged districts in the entire country. What this ends up doing is measuring a student's early exposure to advanced materials rather than their raw potential. It totally penalizes kids who just haven't had that early access. The alternative to this is local norms. This compares a child to peers right in their own school building, which gives a much more accurate picture of their actual potential within their specific environment. It completely levels the playing field. The history of these tests is super important to understand, too. The source material highlights that many traditional cognitive tests were initially designed and normed using middle-class values. Because of this, the very design of the test can act as a systemic barrier. Think about it. A multilingual learner might literally be a math genius, but if a word problem relies on a cultural reference they've never experienced, well, the test ends up measuring their vocabulary and cultural exposure, not their math potential. Section 3. Solutions that actually work.
I know. Everything we've just covered sounds incredibly daunting, but the good news is that we have proven, objective, structural fixes that schools can implement right now to identify all gifted learners.
The absolute most powerful solution found in the research is called universal screening. This means evaluating every single student in a specific grade level for gifted programs, just completely across the board. The crucial point here is that this entirely bypasses that biased referral bottleneck we talked about. You don't need a parent who knows the system inside and out, and you don't need a teacher to magically spot your non-traditional talent. Every single child gets an equal, fair chance to show their potential on paper.
And the results of doing this? They're undeniable. When districts implement universal screening, the jump in identifying capable, underrepresented students is basically unprecedented. Research showed a 174% increase for low-income students, a 118% increase for Hispanic students, and a 74% increase for Black students. And remember, they achieved this simply by giving everyone the test. Absolutely no lowering the bar, no changing the standards. It just proves that the talent was literally always there. In fact, some states are taking these equitable practices a step further with automatic enrollment. States like Washington, North Carolina, and Colorado are actually passing laws saying that if a student meets or exceeds grade-level standards on their state exams, they are automatically and instantly placed in the next most rigorous level of advanced coursework. No opt-in forms required, it just happens seamlessly for the student.
Furthermore, by pairing that universal screening with those building-based local norms we discussed earlier, schools are making a really powerful statement. They're recognizing that true mathematical brilliance exists in literally every single zip code and within every single demographic. You just have to look for it the right way. Section 4. Advocating for your child. So now that you understand the mechanics of the system and exactly where the blind spots are, how can you as a parent to become an informed partner and respectfully advocate for your kid? First things first, arm yourself with the right vocabulary. A huge key term to know is twice exceptional, or 2E for short. This describes a student who is intellectually gifted but also has one or more learning disabilities, like dyslexia or ADHD, or maybe neurodivergent traits like autism. Because school systems often focus so heavily on fixing a student's deficits, their incredible strengths get masked. You need to know this term so you can explain to your school that a child can have a learning challenge and still be an absolute math genius who desperately needs accelerated work. Next, become a keen observer of your child at home. Take note of how they grapple with complex math concepts or logic puzzles. Are they coming up with wild, out-of-the-box ways to solve problems that aren't even in the textbook? Are they asking incredibly deep questions about numbers? Write these observations down. Then, schedule a collaborative meeting with their teacher to share these specific, real-world examples. And to help push for systemic, equitable changes that benefit all students in your district, here are the exact, respectful questions you can bring to your school administration. Do we use universal screening, or are we relying on referrals? Are we using building-based local norms for our testing? And what specific processes do we actually have in place to identify twice exceptional or multilingual students? Asking these questions positions you as a true collaborative partner pushing for best practices. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought to take into your next parent-teacher conference. If your child is acting out, if they seem bored, or if they're struggling to just comply with traditional math worksheets, what if they aren't just acting out? What if they are actually practically begging to be challenged with something much more complex? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep observing,